First speaker, we'll hear from Laszlo Suryan, the rapporteur.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. President. I will speak in my mother tongue because, ceterum censeo, I would like to take this opportunity to protest against any legislation that bans people from speaking their mother tongue. Mr. President, the 2010 budget is being born in the shadow of our financial crisis. Minister of State, Commissioner, honourable colleagues, I must say that we all have to somehow deal with this crisis. We have to tackle it. The crisis has made investors unsure. It has made it more difficult to obtain credit. It has created greater unemployment and production has decreased. So can the EU respond to this crisis? Do we have an answer when it comes to the dangers that climate change represents, an answer to terrorism? Are we able to protect the Union's borders? Are we able to also welcome refugees in a dignified way? The European Parliament would like to have a budget that can answer those questions with a yay, that we can do this. And from that point of view, I must say Parliament is fairly united. I don't think we have any great divisions or great disagreements between the different political parties or groups in this Parliament. And as rapporteur, therefore, I owe thanks. I owe thanks to all the political groups for their contribution. I think the main discrepancy is actually between Council and Parliament. Because of the crisis, the Council would like to have the smallest possible budget. The national parliaments, or rather the national governments, that's also their point of view, and I can understand why they would want such a small budget. But here in the European Parliament, we believe that the European Parliament has a lot of tools in its hands, and we need to make sure that we can use these more forcibly, to better effect. We need to use these instruments in order to deal with the current crisis. That is the whole point. Now, what does that mean in terms of figures? Let's take a look at that. At the time, when we were starting to think about 2010 as a financial year, and that was in the context of a 7-year budget plan, at the time a report was produced, and if you look at today's circumstances, well, it would be a budget of 134 billion in terms of expenditure. That's the cap, 134 billion. Now, the Council is advocating 120 billion instead of that. As far as Parliament is concerned, we don't think 134 billion is actually realistic. The Parliament is taking into account the fact that national governments have their problems, have issues, and therefore the Parliament, for its part, would like to suggest that we move for 127 billion in terms of expenditure. And it's important for us, therefore, to support the proposal made by the Budget Committee, and that is what we'll do during the vote, of course, on Thursday as well. So I think it's important to bear in mind that if you've got a 5-year cycle or a 7-year cycle, what's the point in making promises for 7 years if we never actually stick to those promises 1 year after another? Of course, the annual budget would be reduced every year in that case, and it wouldn't be in line with what we suggested at the beginning of the whole procedure. But there's another issue which is even more important. In our annual budgets, we have compulsory commitment appropriations. Now, many of these commitment appropriations don't have the necessary cover. In fact, this year, we're 1 year behind schedule, if you like, and year on year, this distance between what we wish to obtain and what we do will continue to grow. So it's absolutely important to make sure that commitment appropriation levels are raised. I mean, you might think the situation this year is exactly the same as every other year. Council chisels away at the Commission's proposal, and the European Parliament then tries to wrestle it a little bit back. But actually, if you look more closely, it's not exactly like that. It's not line by line. It's not mechanical. These proposals that have come out here are not formed in that way. We have to remember that we're living in a time of crisis. Everybody has to tighten their belt at a time of crisis. So, of course, we're prepared to support the Council when it seeks to be a little bit more economical in some of its procurement decisions. Elsewhere, where we're looking at the staff required to carry out certain tasks, we're going to bear in mind to what extent the tasks were fulfilled previously, to learn from that lesson. Also, of course, if we get things wrong, we want to make sure that that doesn't jeopardise the programmes themselves. The programmes have to be executed. If ever we run into a problem, I'm sure we're prepared to rectify that if that need arises. We will be prepared to do that at any point. But we do stand by proper execution and precise planning. We need to make sure that the money that's been spent has actually yielded the benefits that we hoped for. Have we actually reached the targets that we had set ourselves, that we'd hoped for as well? In the information policy area, I think it would be difficult to be satisfied under the current circumstances. We've had lost referenda, we've had low turnout at elections. There are many, many complicated reasons behind that, and I think it would be a mistake to actually make a cut in the money that's going to be earmarked for our communications policy. What we're suggesting instead is putting some lines in the reserve for the time being. These reserves can be released very easily as soon as we have current analyses that prove that we have now a more promising communication strategy for the future. In future, we'll need to take a closer look as well at the extent to which our programme objectives are actually reached, or whether they come to fruition in practice. Recently, the Court of Auditors produced a report on the success or efficiency of the dairy sector. It talked about the problems of the dairy sector as well. The Parliament would expect the European Commission to make sure that in its next letter of amendment, you do actually talk about the functioning of this dairy fund. How is it going to operate? We also need a separate budget line for that, and we need to have a sufficient reserve for that dairy fund. What we need is a proper legal basis, a legal basis that will take into account the findings of the Court of Auditors, and one that will make a genuine contribution to the resolution of the problems faced today by the dairy sector. It's not just about money. It's a matter of making sure that we have a better support system for this dairy sector in Europe as a whole, one that's more effective in practice. For all of these reasons, honourable colleagues, I would like to ask you all to move forward, that we should all move together, forward together to whatever extent possible, not too many disagreements. There can, of course, be certain areas of tension. You know, some groups have certain points that they're particularly interested in. We can understand that. I can understand that there might be particular points of relevance for you, but still, I think as for the overall total, we will be in agreement. It's the issue, the principle of having a dairy fund rather than the amount that's put into it that is the most important. So I very much hope that we'll have a sound proposal to put to the Commission on this point. Thank you very much.
Dziękuję panu bardzo.
Thank you very much.
It was 7 minutes for you. Sprawozdawca Vladimir Mańka, 4 minutes.
Now, the following rapporteur, Vladimir Mańka, has the floor.
Predseda, vážený pán komisár.
Thank you very much, President.